I never thought I'd find myself writing this, but life has a funny way of coming full circle. You could say I was the other child, the one who always seemed to fall short in my parents' eyes. I'm 25 now, but I can still remember growing up in the shadow of my younger brother, Ryan, at 23. He was always the favorite. I don't even think it was subtle. My parents, in their mid-50s, worshipped him. He was their golden child, their perfect boy. They bragged about him at every family gathering, always talking about how successful and perfect he was. And somehow, even when he crashed his car into a tree, they found a way to blame the tree. On the other hand, I was always the problem child, not because I actually caused trouble, but because I wasn't Ryan. I could do everything right, and it still wouldn't matter. If I got straight A's, they'd tell me that Ryan was naturally intelligent and didn't need to try as hard. If I won an award, it was brushed off as nothing more than an extracurricular activity. If I worked hard during summer jobs, they'd laugh and say that Ryan was out enjoying life, not wasting time on nonsense like me. It felt like I was nothing more than background noise in my own family. It wasn't just that they favored him. Ryan was also a master manipulator when it came to turning them against me. He never had to try hard. The favoritism was so deep-rooted that he didn't even need to outright accuse me of anything. He just dropped subtle hints and plant seeds of doubt. I remember one time, I was about 17, studying for a big exam. Ryan came into my room, messing with my stuff, poking me in the back of the head, humming loudly, basically doing everything he could to annoy me on purpose. I told him to get out, but he ignored me. After about 10 minutes of this, I slammed my textbook shut and yelled at him to leave me alone. That's when Ryan ran straight to my parents, of course, telling them I was angry and scaring him. He told them I was stressed and taking it out on him. I tried to explain what happened, but my parents weren't interested. They just said I needed to work on my temper and stop bullying my little brother. Ryan was an expert at planting doubt in their minds. He never outright accused me of anything. He just implied things. One time, I saved up for months to buy a new laptop. I was proud of it. But, of course, Ryan was jealous. One day, he casually told my parents, "I don't know how he could afford that. Are you sure he didn't take money from somewhere?" Suddenly, my parents were interrogating me about my finances, demanding to see where the money came from. They never would have asked Ryan that, but because it was me, they assumed I was up to something shady. As I grew older, I learned to avoid their drama. I focused on myself, started working out, picked up some skills, and saved what I could. I knew I wouldn't get handouts from them, so I made sure I didn't need them. Meanwhile, Ryan was the exact opposite. He thought life was one big vacation. He never kept a job for more than a few months and always had some new hobby or business idea that never went anywhere. He went to college, not to study, but to party and barely scrape by. And my parents funded all of it. Then Ryan met Zoe. She was 22, and they started dating when he was in college. She was the type of girl Ryan would go for. Loud, always needing attention, and constantly on social media, trying to act like an influencer. She had this fake charm that worked on guys like Ryan, but was easy to see through if you paid attention. Zoe thrived on drama. If there wasn't a problem, she'd create one just for the attention. If someone at a store gave her a weird look, it was always the cashier being rude, probably jealous. If she got constructive criticism in class, it was always my professor is literally targeting me because I'm too pretty. If a waitress messed up her order, she'd act like it was a personal attack, ranting about how people don't respect her. Everything had to revolve around her. She hijacked conversations and made everything about herself. You know, the type of girl who just had to be the center of attention. At first, I didn't care about her. She was just another one of Ryan's girlfriends, the kind he cycled through every few months. I thought she'd be gone soon enough, but Zoe stuck around. Over time, I started noticing little things. She was getting a bit too friendly with me. You know, the kind of friendly, complimenting me when no one else was around. "You're so disciplined. I wish Ryan had your focus," she'd say. At first, I brushed it off, but then it escalated. She'd ask me about my workouts and make jokes about how Ryan could learn from me. She'd text me out of nowhere, asking for advice on things that had nothing to do with me. I should have shut it down earlier, but I figured she was just playing some dumb game to make Ryan jealous. It wasn't my problem. Then, one night after a family dinner, things crossed the line. Zoe sneaked into my room. She leaned in too close, blocking my way out. Her voice dropped, like she was testing the waters. She told me she was bored with Ryan, that I was different, and that she wouldn't tell anyone if I didn't. And then she tried to kiss me. I pushed her off immediately. I wasn't subtle about it. I told her to stay the hell away from me, and that if she tried anything like that again, I'd expose her myself. That's when everything changed. Zoe's whole act shifted. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't apologetic. She just looked at me, calculating. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't going to end well. The very next day, I came home, and the house felt different. My parents were stiff. Ryan looked at me like I had just killed his dog. And then Zoe, standing behind them, started crying. She looked at them with wide eyes, and then said the words that would change everything. He tried to force himself on me last night. I froze. I thought I misheard her. I laughed, but not because it was funny. I laughed because it was so ridiculous. I thought it had to be a joke. But no. Ryan lunged at me. My dad had to hold him back. "You sick freak," Ryan yelled. I tried to explain. I told them Zoe was the one who came on to me. I told them I rejected her, that this was some kind of revenge, because she was scared. I'd expose her. But none of it mattered. My parents didn't even hesitate. My dad looked at me coldly and said, "Get your things and get out." I looked at my mom. She wouldn't even meet my eyes. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to tell them how stupid they were for believing such a thing. But I knew how this worked. They had already made their choice. And just like that, I was kicked out, no hesitation, no doubt. They threw me out like I wasn't their son, like I hadn't been a part of their family for over 20 years. What really got me, though, was that not a single phone call came afterward, not a single text, not even a half-hearted, "Are you okay?" from my mom. I had nothing but a duffel bag of clothes, a few $100 in my bank account, and my car. That was it. I spent the first few nights in my car. It wasn't fun, but I had no choice. Those first few nights, I stayed in my car, just trying to survive. It wasn't glamorous, far from it, but I had to make it work. The car was uncomfortable, cramped, and it was cold at night, but I refused to let it break me. I wasn't going to sit around feeling sorry for myself. Every second I spent being angry at my parents, every minute I wasted resenting them, was a minute I wasn't using to get out of this mess. I had enough saved from odd jobs. I'd worked over the years to keep me off the streets for a little while, but that wasn't going to last forever. I needed a real plan. The whole thing about my parents tossing me out like garbage, without so much as a second thought, had stung, and it still stung. But at the end of the day, their actions showed me exactly how little they valued me. It wasn't the fact that they kicked me out, it was the ease with which they did it. No hesitation, no doubt. They'd thrown me away without even thinking twice, and that hit harder than anything. But I wasn't going to let their decisions determine my future. After a few days, I got a call from my cousin, Lucas. He'd always been there for me, and he was the only one who didn't believe Zoe's lie. Lucas had been my buddy since childhood, and we'd always had each other's backs. He offered me a place to stay while I figured things out. By then, he was a real brother to me. I stayed with him for a few days. It wasn't ideal, and I knew I couldn't burden him for too long. He had his own problems to deal with, and I wasn't about to impose. But I was grateful for his help, at least for those few days. I didn't have to sleep in my car. Once I had a roof over my head and enough time to gather myself, I started looking for work. I found a temp job at a warehouse within a week. The pay was crap, but honestly, I wasn't in a position to be picky. I took what I could get. I also managed to scrape together enough money to rent a tiny room in a shared house. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The walls were thin, and I had to pray my roommates weren't addicts or lunatics, but it was a place to sleep, and that was enough for me. I wasn't done yet. I kept pushing. I took on another job, working overnight at a gas station. 2 jobs, no sleep, just working, eating whatever was cheap, and crashing in my car between shifts. It was grueling, but I refused to let myself quit. I wasn't going to let everything fall apart, no matter how hard it got. Meanwhile, Ryan was living it up. I tried not to check his social media, but sometimes curiosity got the best of me. And every time I saw his posts, it was the same thing: parties, vacations, new expensive things. Watching him flaunt his lifestyle felt like watching someone burn through their inheritance. My parents were still bankrolling his lifestyle, and he was milking it for everything it was worth. And yeah, it pissed me off. Not just because of the obvious unfairness of it all, but because I knew exactly how it would end. Ryan had never worked a real job in his life. He had no skills, no work ethic, and no plan. He was burning through money like it would never run out. But one day, it would. And when that day came, I knew exactly who he'd come running to. But that wasn't my problem. My problem was surviving, building a life for myself. The warehouse job, though not glamorous, eventually turned into something more stable. I started picking up extra shifts whenever I could. I lived cheap, cutting out unnecessary expenses. Every dollar went toward building a safety net. Once I had a little cushion saved up, I started thinking bigger. I picked up some books on finance and investing. I started learning about business and even taught myself some coding. Every spare moment I had, I was learning something new. I didn't want to just survive. I wanted to be untouchable. I started freelancing on the side. At first, it was just small gigs, making 10 or 20 bucks here and there. It wasn't much, but I stuck with it. Over time, those small gigs turned into steady income. Eventually, I was making as much from freelancing as I did from the warehouse job. A year passed, and I was able to move out of that crummy shared house into my own place. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was mine. I quit the warehouse job and went full-time into business. By year 3, I was making more money than I ever thought possible. But all this time, my family had been completely silent. Since the whole Zoe incident, they didn't try to reach out. They didn't even care, and I couldn't care less. At that point, I had cut them off completely. Throughout it all, I kept in touch with Lucas. We'd meet up every now and then, catch up. It wasn't until a couple of months had passed without us meeting that Lucas called me and said he had some news. He wanted me to meet him at a coffee shop. When I got there, he didn't waste any time. "You won't believe what I'm about to tell you," he said, his voice sounding a little more serious than usual. He told me how Ryan's life was starting to unravel. It started with small things. The flashy vacations stopped. The constant flexing on social media slowed down. Ryan was having money problems. Apparently, he had tried to start a business, some half-baked entrepreneur nonsense, thinking it would make him rich overnight. It failed spectacularly. He lost a ton of money, burned through his savings, and still hadn't figured out how to work an actual job. Lucas said, "People always say you learn who your real friends are when you hit rock bottom." Ryan learned that the hard way. The same people who had been partying with him, they all disappeared the second he wasn't useful anymore. And then came Zoe. For a while, she had been just as flashy as Ryan, if not worse. They posted about how they were living the dream, acting like they were the next big power couple. But once the money started running out, Zoe ditched him, and to top it all off, it turned out that she had cheated on him with multiple people, even hooking up with one of her friends. I wasn't surprised. Honestly, I saw it coming. Zoe was never in it for the long haul. She was there for the lifestyle, the attention, the free vacations. Once Ryan couldn't provide those things anymore, she cut her losses and bailed. But here's the kicker. My parents were finally starting to notice. They had spent years throwing money at Ryan, hoping that he'd magically become successful. But now, with nothing to show for it, they were questioning everything. They hadn't been part of my life for so long, but I knew exactly how they were feeling. My mom must have been devastated, watching her perfect son fall from grace. My dad, the same guy who had kicked me out without a second thought, must have been wondering why his golden child still needed handouts. At this point, I didn't feel bad for them, though. I wasn't going to be the one to fix their mess. They had made their bed, and it was about to get a whole lot messier. Zoe, known for her big mouth, had been out with some of her old party friends after she dumped Ryan. Turns out, she got a little too drunk and let her mouth run wild. And guess what? She admitted to them that she had lied about me. She said I never did anything to her. She only accused me because I had rejected her and threatened to expose her, and she thought it was hilarious. Her friends recorded her saying all of this. I didn't know any of this was happening at the time. I was too busy living my life to care about what Zoe or Ryan were up to. But eventually, one of her friends sent that recording to my parents. They couldn't ignore it, and when they heard it, everything changed. They finally realized what they had done to me. They had ruined their relationship with their own son over a complete lie. And just like that, after all this time, they wanted to make things right. The next day, everything changed. I came home, expecting it to be just another day. But the atmosphere in the house was completely off. My parents were tense, stiff, almost like they were walking on eggshells. Ryan looked at me with the kind of eyes someone gives you when they believe you've done something terrible. And behind him, Zoe stood, tears streaming down her face. The sight of her crying didn't make sense at first. I didn't want to say anything. But he tried to force himself on me last night. She sobbed, her voice shaking. I froze. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I thought I misheard her. My heart sank. My mind screamed that this had to be some kind of sick joke. I laughed, but not because it was funny. Because it was so ridiculous, I didn't know how else to react. But it wasn't a joke. It was real. Ryan, who had been standing behind her like a silent witness, suddenly lunged at me. My father had to physically hold him back. "You sick freak," Ryan shouted, his face red with anger. I couldn't process it. Zoe's accusation, it was like a punch to the gut. She was standing there, looking hurt, as if I had actually done something wrong. I tried to explain. I tried to tell them the truth. I told them that she had come on to me, that I had rejected her, that this was all a twisted plan to get revenge because she was scared I'd expose her for what she had tried to do. But none of it mattered. They didn't even ask for proof. They didn't try to hear my side. They didn't hesitate for a second. My dad looked at me coldly and said, "Get your things and get out." My mother didn't even meet my eyes. She stood there, silent, not a word, not a glance. That silence spoke volumes. It was like she had already made up her mind. I could feel the weight of the decision on my shoulders. I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream at them for being so naive, so gullible, for believing this disgusting lie. But I knew it would be pointless. They had already made their choice, and I knew that, no matter what I said, nothing would change. Arguing would just make them dig in deeper. So, I packed a duffel bag with my clothes, grabbed whatever cash I had left in my account, and left. Getting kicked out of my own house was one thing. Realizing how easy it was for them to do it, without a second thought, without hesitation, that was the worst part. It was like I was nothing to them, like I hadn't been their son for 20 years. And the thing that really hurt, not a single call, not a single message, "No, are you okay?" from my mother, no attempt to reach out. They just threw me out like garbage. I wasn't their son anymore. They didn't even care. I didn't have much, just my duffel bag, a few $100 in my bank account, and my car. That was it. I hadn't prepared for this. I hadn't planned for being thrown out. But, thankfully, I had some money saved up from odd jobs I'd done over the years. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me from sleeping on the street for a little while. I spent the first few nights sleeping in my car. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't fun. But it was what I had to do. And I wasn't going to let myself sink into despair. The first few nights were the hardest. The loneliness, the rejection. It was all overwhelming. But after those first few days, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. As the news of the whole situation spread through the family, I found myself hearing less from my parents and more from people who were genuinely concerned about me. The first person to call was Lucas, my cousin. He was the only one who didn't believe Zoe's lies. Lucas had always been there for me when I needed someone. And when everything came crashing down, he was the one who reached out. "Hey man, I heard what happened," Lucas said over the phone. "I don't believe that crap for a second. You can come stay with me for a while." Lucas was the only person who stood by me through everything. He was more than just a cousin. He was a real brother to me. I was so grateful. I went to stay with him for a few days, and it gave me the time I needed to process everything. I couldn't stay with him long. I knew he had his own life to handle, but for those few days, I felt like I had some stability again. For the first time since I was kicked out, I didn't feel completely alone. After those few days, I knew I had to start taking responsibility for my own future. I couldn't depend on anyone else. I had to get my life together. I found a temporary job at a warehouse. The pay was bad, but I wasn't in a position to be picky. I needed to keep going, to keep moving forward. At the same time, I scraped together enough money to rent a tiny room in a shared house. The place wasn't great, the walls were thin, and I had to pray my roommates weren't drug addicts or crazy people. But it was shelter. It was a place where I could breathe. And then I picked up another gig working overnight at a gas station, 2 jobs, little sleep. It was exhausting, but it kept my mind busy. I couldn't afford to let myself dwell on the mess that had been my life. I had to keep going. While I worked these jobs, Ryan's life continued on its own path. I tried not to pay attention to what he was doing, but sometimes my curiosity got the best of me. Every time I checked his social media, it was the same thing. Parties, vacations, new gadgets. It was like watching a child burn through his inheritance, spending money like it would never run out. And my parents, they were still funding his lifestyle. They were still making excuses for him. I won't lie, it pissed me off. Not just because it was unfair, but because I knew exactly how this story was going to end. Ryan had never worked a real job in his life. He had no skills, no work ethic, and no plan. He was burning through money like it was endless. But I knew that one day it would catch up with him. And when that day came, I knew exactly who he would come running to. But that wasn't my problem. I had my own battles to fight. I had my own future to build. And so I threw myself into my work, determined to make something of myself. The warehouse job turned into something more stable, and I started picking up extra shifts whenever I could. I lived as frugally as possible, no spending on stupid things. Every penny I saved went toward building a safety net. After a while, I started thinking bigger. I picked up books on finance, investing, and business. I taught myself coding in my spare time. I didn't want to just survive. I wanted to thrive. I began freelancing on the side. It started small, just a few gigs online, 10, 20 bucks here and there. But I stuck with it, slowly. Those small jobs turned into steady income. Eventually, I was making as much from freelancing as I was from my warehouse job. A year passed. I moved out of that shared house and into my own place. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I quit the warehouse job and went full-time into business. By year 3, I was making more money than I ever thought possible. And through it all, my family was still stuck. Ryan's life, built on a foundation of lies and handouts, was starting to unravel. The flashy vacations stopped. The parties died down. Ryan's money problems began to catch up with him. But none of that was my problem. I had my own life to live, and I was determined to live it on my terms. As time passed, life moved on. I kept my head down and focused on building my future. I had worked hard to get where I was. I wasn't about to let my past, my family's betrayal, or Ryan's never-ending drama drag me down. But as much as I tried to avoid it, I couldn't escape the fact that my family was still falling apart, and I knew exactly where it was heading. Ryan's life was spiraling out of control. The same flashy vacations he used to post about on social media stopped. The constant flexing and showing off his new toys slowed down. I could see from the outside what was happening. The money had run out. The doc credit cards were maxed. The business ideas that once seemed so promising were just empty fantasies. Ryan had tried starting his own business, another half-baked plan to get rich quick, but it had failed spectacularly. He lost a ton of money, burned through all his savings, and still didn't know how to hold down a real job. It was like watching someone self-destruct, and no one, not even my parents, could save him. The people who had partied with him, cheered him on when he was wasting money, disappeared when he stopped being useful. The party was over, and Ryan was left to face the consequences of his reckless choices. But it wasn't just Ryan who was sinking. Zoe, the girl who had caused all the chaos in my life, had her own fall from grace. She was never in it for Ryan. Not really. She was always about the lifestyle, the free trips, the attention, the Instagram-worthy moments. When the money dried up, she ditched him without a second thought. To make matters worse, it came out that she had been cheating on him with multiple people, one of them being one of her own friends. Honestly, I had seen it coming. She was never in it for love. She was in it for the perks. And once those were gone, so was she. Now, My parents were starting to see what had been clear to me all along. They had spent years throwing money at Ryan, hoping he would magically turn his life around. They had made every excuse for him, justifying his failures. But now, with nothing to show for it, they were questioning everything. They were beginning to realize how wrong they had been. I hadn't heard from them in years, not since they kicked me out, but I knew how they thought. I could imagine the panic in my mom's eyes when she saw that her golden boy was a total failure. I could picture my dad, the man who had tossed me aside so easily, now wondering why Ryan was still asking for handouts. But here's where it got interesting. Zoe, being the attention seeker that she was, had a big mouth. And after she ditched Ryan, she went out with some of her old party friends. In her drunken stupor, she let it slip that the whole thing, everything that happened between her and me, had been a lie. She admitted that I had never done anything to her. She only accused me because I rejected her and threatened to expose her. She even laughed about how easily my parents had believed her and how they never thought to question her. Her friends found it so funny that they recorded her confession. And eventually, one of those friends, someone who was just as toxic as Zoe, sent the recording to my parents. They didn't know it at the time, but that recording was about to change everything. I wasn't there to see their reactions, but I can imagine the shock, the shame, and the overwhelming guilt they must have felt when they realized they had ruined their relationship with me over a complete lie. Zoe had manipulated them, and they had fallen for it. And so, after all these years, the calls started coming. At first, it was just a few missed calls, then a text from my mom saying, "We need to talk." Then, the voicemails began. "We realize we were wrong. We're sorry. We should have believed you." Ryan even texted me, asking if we could talk. I ignored it all. I wasn't stupid. I knew exactly what was happening. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They weren't apologizing because they realized how wrong they had been. No, they were doing it to fix their own guilt. They couldn't stand the fact that they had tossed me aside, thrown me out like garbage. And now, years later, they had to live with the truth that everything had been based on a lie. They wanted to make themselves feel better, but that didn't change what they had done to me. I didn't respond until my mom left a voicemail that finally caught my attention. "Ryan is in serious trouble. Please just call me back." I almost laughed when I heard it. Serious trouble? Was his credit card maxed out? Was his latest get-rich-quick scheme falling apart? Was he struggling to make ends meet now that Zoe wasn't around to leech off of him? I let the voicemail sit for a day before I called her back, not because I cared, but because I was curious. She picked up on the first ring, and there was a sigh of relief in her voice. "Oh, thank God. I wasn't sure you'd answer," she breathed. "What do you want?" I asked, leaning back in my chair, trying to hide how little I cared. She hesitated for a second, probably still trying to figure out the best way to spin this. Then, she finally spoke. "It's Ryan. He's in a lot of debt. He made some bad investments, took out loans, and now the banks won't help him. No one will. I couldn't help it." I laughed. "And what do you want me to do about it? Do you expect me to swoop in and save him? Throw the money I worked my ass off for at the same people who threw me away without a second thought?" I heard her voice falter. "You're doing well now. You have the means to help. Family looks out for each other. You wouldn't just let your family drown, would you?" I took a deep breath. "Let me get this straight. You all believed a liar over me. You threw me out without a second thought, ignored me for years, and now that Ryan has finally screwed up his life beyond repair, you want me to fix it?" I paused, letting the silence drag on. "It's not that simple, sweetheart," I said coldly, cutting her off before she could say anything else. "Let me think about it." And I hung up. I wasn't considering helping them. I wanted them to sit with the uncertainty. I wanted them to wonder if maybe, just maybe, I'd swoop in like the perfect son they had never appreciated. Let them hope. Let them wait. And then I set up the meeting. I told my mom to have everyone there. Her, my father, and Ryan, if they wanted to beg. They could do it to my face. We met at a nice restaurant, one I knew they could barely afford anymore. They probably thought I chose it to be polite. But when I walked in, I could see their faces. My mother looked like she had aged 10 years. My father, usually smug and confident, looked uncomfortable. Ryan, for the first time in his life, looked wrecked. He looked desperate. I sat down and leaned back in my chair, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. "All right," I said. "Go ahead." They didn't waste time. My mom immediately launched into a long-winded speech about family, forgiveness, second chances. My father, too proud to beg, just muttered about mistakes being made. And then Ryan spoke. "I screwed up. I know that. But I just need a little help. Man, just enough to get back on my feet." I let them talk, let them pour it all out. Then, finally, I spoke. "No," I said, shrugging. "I'm not helping you." My mother gasped. "Sweetheart, be reasonable." "Reasonable," I repeated. "What wasn't reasonable was abandoning me, and only coming back now because your golden child finally ran out of luck." Ryan opened his mouth to argue, but I wasn't finished. I pulled out my wallet, took out a $100 bill, and set it on the table. "There, buy yourself some dignity." And then I stood up and left. Years of anger, resentment, and frustration, all of it just faded away as I walked out. I left them sitting there, staring at the $100 bill like it was some kind of insult. To be fair, it was. A few months passed, and life continued. My business grew, my circle stayed solid, and I felt better than I ever had before. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. Meanwhile, Ryan's life fell apart. He burned through all his money, got caught in shady business deals, and eventually faced charges for fraud and embezzlement. The guy who once had everything handed to him ended up in a prison cell. My parents, devastated, weren't upset that their golden child was a criminal. What really broke them was that their perfect son wasn't so perfect anymore. Their blind loyalty had gotten them nowhere, and now their pride and joy was wearing an orange jumpsuit. They spent years burning bridges with me, treating me like an outsider, but by the time they realized they had backed the wrong horse, I was already too far ahead to care.